Hi guys, it's Granny again. I hope you guys are having an awesome day. And I want to remind you that in any of my videos, um, when we're talking about the perpetrators in our cases, remembering that they are um, innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Today we are talking about the Idaho 4 case and the perpetrator, the alleged perpetrator, Brian Koberger. Um, so on November 13th in 2022 in um, a six-bedroom home that was off campus, 1211 King Road in Moscow, Idaho. Four University of Idaho students were found unalived in their off-campus home. Ethan Chapin, 20, from Conway, Washington. Madison Mogan, 21, from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Santa Kernodle, 20, from Avondale, Arizona. And Kaylee Gonzalez, 21, from Rathdrum, Idaho. So, a horrible, horrible tragedy. Um, and um, Santa and Ethan were found on the second floor. Kaylee and Maddie, who had been friends since childhood, were found on the third floor in the home. Um, and I can't even imagine what this must have been like. They were, um, the police believed that this tragedy happened between 4 and 4:25 in the morning, and 911 call was not made until like afternoon. Now, there were two other students, girl students in the home who were still alive. Um, and one of them was Bethany Funk, who was down on the first floor. Um, and the other one was Dylan Mortensen, who was in a room on the second floor, like across from the room that Xana and Ethan were in. So we'll get to more of that later. Um, but on November 15th, the day, 2 days after this happened, Moscow Police Department issued a statement saying an edged weapon, such as a knife, was used um, in this tragedy, and no weapon was found. On November 16th, they held a press conference and stated that it was a targeted attack and that they did not have a suspect at this time. A day later, on the 17th, the Latah County coroner um, stated the cause of death was that the victims were likely asleep when they were with a large, some victims had defensive wounds. So now between that time and December 7th, there was so much speculation going on. That was a long time. The community was starting to get worried that they didn't have a suspect, that they didn't know what was going on. They were getting upset with the Moscow Police Department, and there was a lot of speculation online, people being named, called out, friends, boyfriends, professors. It was incredibly crazy, um, who all turned out to be innocent, by the way. Um, and I remember thinking I would really hate to see this happen. I think everybody was getting concerned, and my thoughts were I would really hate to see nothing, that the case goes cold and that they would not be able to find the perpetrator, you know, and how sad it was because these kids in their early 20s, just starting their lives. They were enjoying the college life. They were just starting their lives. Oh my goodness. And I can't even think, I mean, how quickly they were cut down and how that community must have been feeling because it's not a very big community. And most of the community, over half of the community, were college students who all took off because it was Thanksgiving, Christmas break. Many of them left, and I don't blame them. On December 7th, though, police announced that they were interested in speaking with the driver of a white Hyundai Elantra, years 2011 to 2013. Um, that Elantra was spotted by Ring cameras near the scene at the time that this tragedy happened. Okay, so now everybody's looking, and there was cases, and that's awesome because people saw it, people were trying to help, and there were cases that were not that vehicle, and yet there must have been maybe one that did know what that vehicle was. I don't know. Um, but on December 15th, we find out that there are two traffic stops very close together, right, in Indiana. And in the car was 28-year-old Brian Koberger with his father alongside him in the passenger seat. Okay. Now, these stops by the Indiana police officers, they stated why they stopped them, but they just chatted with them both times. They didn't give them a warning, they didn't give them a ticket, nothing, not even a written warning, nothing, right? And very weird stops. Heard different stories. I don't know what the true story was behind the whole thing as to whether the FBI ordered that or not. I heard yes, and then I heard no, and I don't know, it doesn't matter. The fact is they happened, right? The FBI was keeping an eye on him because they did have him, I guess, from very early on in the investigation. Brian Koberger was on their radar, which is good to know. And of course, they're not going to tell the public that because then what's Brian going to do? He's going to go get rid of everything, right? So you don't want to bring that out. And you don't even, I mean, I look back and think I'm glad that they didn't say that they had a suspect. I'm glad that they didn't publicize any of it, that they kept a lot of this close to their vest because, that could have given Brian time to get rid of a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff. I do think that the two stops in Indiana, um, I guess they were close together in time and in mileage. Um, I think those were unfortunate because I think at that point, Brian probably thought something was going on. But on December 30th, they arrested Brian Koberger, 28 years old, in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, at the home of his parents. It was in the middle of the night. I don't know if it was like 1 o'clock in the morning or something. And I think um, because the time changes, you know, I don't know what time it was in Idaho compared to when in Pennsylvania. I think both times were given, and it doesn't really matter, but it was in the middle of the night. And um, Brian was found. We now know this. We didn't know this at the time, but Brian was found in the kitchen, awake, with black t-shirt and black shorts on, with medical gloves, and he was taking garbage and putting them into little Ziploc bags. Okay, Very strange, very strange. But it almost does sound like somebody that's trying to hide their DNA, right? Well, on that night, they actually had search warrants for the house. So not only did they take a cheek swab, Brian, for his DNA, but they also um, gathered a lot of things. They gathered black clothing, black masks, black gloves, obviously, computer information, his phone, I don't know, a lot of other things. And from the white Elantra, they actually took the gas pedal, the brake pedal, they took the seats, the floor mats, the headrests, a lot of things from the Elantra as well. So they put him in jail that night in Pennsylvania. Um, his extradition hearing in Pennsylvania was on January 3rd, and his temporary lawyer at the time said that Brian waived his extradition to Moscow, Idaho. He wanted to get back, and he was eager to be exonerated. So then on January 4th, our suspect, Brian Koberger, arrived in Idaho. On January 5th, they relieved a lot of the court documents of the case because this is what they had to present to Pennsylvania court judge, circuit court judge, in order to get the search warrant and arrest warrant for Brian. Um, that a knife sheath was found um, in the home on the bed next to Maddie, and on that button was DNA that was found at the home in Pennsylvania. Um, there was a witness that claimed she saw a person 5'10" or taller, a male, not very muscular, dressed all in black with a black mask, and he had bushy eyebrows. The person walked to the sliding glass door right past her, and she, she was frozen in fear, evidently, and once he got to the sliding glass door and let himself out, she locked herself in her room. This, they alluded that was someone with the initials of DM, which would be Dylan Mortensen, one of the surviving victims in the home. Koberger's phone records showed the phone stopped reporting a signal at 2:47 on the night of the tragedy and appears to turn back on at 4:48 a.m. closer to his home. So it meant that he had the phone with him. However, he must have turned it off or had it in airplane mode, right? So there were 12 other instances where the phone had pinged right near the home, near or at the home. Um, on January 12th, Brian Koberger appeared in court in Idaho. The preliminary hearing was set for June 26th, and he waived his right to a speedy preliminary hearing because he knew that him and his lawyer wanted to see what kind of information they had, what kind of evidence they have, you know. She needed time to prepare, and so he waived his right to a speedy preliminary hearing. So it is set for June 26th. But some of the things that we know, first of all, Brian was a PhD student at the University of Washington. He was a teacher's assistant, and he wasn't doing very well at that. And I guess he found out once he got back to Pennsylvania that they had fired him because he had several run-ins with his professors and female students in the class, and something about not grading consistently and grading the female students worse than the male students. And I don't know. All this is alleged. We don't know, but that's what we've been told. Um, We know that in late October of 2022, he had messaged one of the victims on Instagram. And when she didn't get back to him, he messaged her a few more times. There was also several pictures on his phone of this victim. We're not certain who this is, and I'm sure this is all going to come out later. There's been a lot of speculation again, but I like to stick with the facts. I don't I don't want to ever give something that's not true unless I say it's been speculated, right? Um, so we know that on the day or the day after he was murdered, excuse me, I'm so sorry. On the day or the day after he was arrested, wow, he they did it, they did a search warrant at his home in Pullman, Washington, his apartment, which was student housing. And I don't know, they took, I remember thinking at the time I was really disappointed in what they took, but some of the items that they took could be very instrumental. There were hairs found. If any of those hairs were the victims, that's solid gold, right? There was animal hair found. If that animal hair was Murphy's, that's solid gold. Um, they took computers and um, items that had dark red or brownish stains on them, possibly blood. Um, and I don't know what all else from there. Um, but so now they have, they also searched his office at the University of Washington, but I guess nothing was found there. There was nothing there. Um, so, there's been a lot of speculation in this case, and talking extreme speculation, talking about outright accusing boyfriends and a professor, which ended up in a lawsuit, and other friends of the murder, and it very, very, very extreme to the point where I'm sure the Moscow Police Department had to assign detectives to go down these rabbit trails. And you have to think that those detectives probably could have better used their time toward the investigation. So there's a lot of things. You're talking all the stuff that they brought from Pullman, Washington, all the stuff that they brought from Pennsylvania. I mean, not to mention interviews and you know ring cam evidence and things to go through that their time could have been spent much better. Um, but some items to note. Brian was red flagged at a bar in Pennsylvania before he ever came to Washington for making females uncomfortable. There was actually notes in their system. And so one day when the owner was actually there to greet Brian when he came in, and he just kind of wanted to put a note out there to Brian, letting him know he knew what had been going on and he hoped that they wouldn't have any more incidents like that. And Brian said to him, I don't know what you're talking about. I guess he had his drink and he left and he'd never been back. Um, he had a class. He had gotten his PhD in DeSales University, and he had a class there under Professor Ramsland, who was the person who wrote the BTK killer book. Um, that professor has People have reached out to her, and she has refused to comment on the Brian Koberger case, which means she might be a witness. Who knows? Um, This one really angers me. Brian has fangirls, including a woman, you know, who's older and I think has children, says she loves him. We know that women, girls go for bad boys, but I think that's taking the bad boy attraction to an extreme, in my opinion. Um, Brian's attorney has been accused of conflict of interest because she has been an attorney of record for two of the victims' families, um, Kernodle and Chapin family. And she was actually, in fact, attorney on record for Tara Kernodle at the time that she was assigned to be Brian's attorney, and so she had to step back. And from everything that we've learned, typically when that happens, they usually will not take the new case, they will stick with their original client. But you know, this one's going to be a sensational case, right? Also, it could end up being, depending on what the state goes for, it could end up being a death penalty case. And if that's the case, then she is a certified attorney in that realm. Um, do I disagree with this? Yes, I do. I feel very strongly about it. Um, and the reason that I feel very strongly about it is that I want Brian to have a fair trial, right? I want nothing to stand in the way. And if this could ever be used as a mistrial, you know, a reason for mistrial, I don't know, that would make me really angry. Um, his attorney has recently requested a second attorney that is certified in death penalty cases, which might mean that they feel that the state is going to move forward with the death penalty in this case. Um, and you know, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that's coming out constantly. Um, Brian is currently in jail in Moscow, Idaho. The jail is underneath the courthouse, and he's in a small cell. I guess he has his own TV, his own remote. He's let out once a day, and I guess he has found the Lord while he's been in jail. He attends services. So those are some of the things that we have found out. It the judge has put a ban on anyone associated with the case talking about it. Even though that has happened, that ban is in effect. There has been some things that have come out, leaked or whatever. Um, so, you know, June is going to be here pretty quick. It's now March. June will be here really quickly. And hopefully we'll find out more at that time. Um, and we'll see what happens. It'll be interesting to see what Brian's plea is going to be, right? Um, I am going to do a separate video on the four victims and their families without discussing Brian at that time. And the reason that I'm going to do that is not to make the families uncomfortable by any means, but just to make a feel good, more of a feel good video of the four victims who lost their lives on that night. And I've always said that I have a heart toward victims and their families that are left. And I want more emphasis to be placed on them because sometimes we get so caught up in the perpetrator and seeing him brought to justice, which of course we want, right? Which of course we want, but we lose sight of the victims. And so, yes, I'm going to be doing, it's not going to be a long video, but it's just going to be, you know, a good piece that lifts them and their families up, and hopefully, people will keep them in their prayers. So stay tuned for the next one and the next live. We'll see you soon.